Now, the opposite of real tennis isn't fake tennis, it's lawn tennis. On today's episode of Life's Potluck Buffet, we're going to talk about court games and their origins, and we're going to ask the cards to hold court and make pronouncements about our work in life. I'm John Paulus. You're listening to Life's Potluck Buffet, only on YouTube. Today's episode is episode 348 in a series of 365 days of Life's Potluck Buffet. If you've been enjoying Life's Potluck Buffet, please subscribe. And if you've already subscribed, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. If you have a Brave browser, you can now contribute basic attention tokens to Life's Potluck Buffet with John Paulus on YouTube. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening. Do you know the sport Jai-Alai? Have you heard of Jai-Alai? That's what we call it in the United States. In places where it's played originally, like in the Basque country, it's called cesta punta, which means basket tip. And if you're familiar with Jai-Alai, it's a sport where you have it's kind of this, it's called a chistera, which is a wicker or woven basket that is that attaches to your hand and arm, and you basically use it to kind of propel a ball or throw a ball against a wall, and then there are various ways of scoring points. That is the basis of what we call Jai-Alai, which is one of many pelota sports. And pelota is just the generic Spanish word for a spherical thing that we would call a ball. And other ball sports are also called pelota, and like the old ball game in terms of baseball, like a ball game is a pelota as well. So, but the pilota in other languages like Basque, and there are a lot of versions. That word really defines a set of many games, and I'm inclined to think that there is a astounding diversity and number of ball games where you're either playing against opponents across a net or you're playing by hitting the ball against a wall in the areas that are in the modern countries of Spain and France and in Basque country especially. And I think that area of Spain and France in a modern sense was really a kind of hotbed of the development of many different types of ball sports that we have in different forms around the world now. One example is that example of Jai-Alai, which used to be used for betting purposes in the United States, and it was very big in the state of Connecticut, and it is still played in Florida, for example. It was in other states as well, but Jai-Alai, the standard accounts say that the reason Jai-Alai went away was because the possibility of betting in casinos and in other forms that became available, because early on the betting in the United States was very limited, and so the only way to expand gambling was really to do kind of new parimutuel sport creation. So parimutuel betting is where the bets, the odds come from pooled money, people's choices in a pool of money, and the whole pool of money is what is then divided based on the odds to the members of the pool with the winning bets of various types. So that's what's called parimutuel betting. and that's common for horse racing and other types of things like jai alai, for example. It's different from fixed odds betting, where the odds that are given are fixed at whatever they are when the bets are offered. So that's a different type of thing that you don't fully know what the payout, so to speak, will be in parimutuel betting until the bets close and you have an actual total for the pool, and the math has to be done and so forth, and fees and taxes need to be taken from the total, and then the remainder gets distributed. Now, in the late 1980s in the United States, one of the longest strikes in sporting history happened, and that was the jai alai players, who were mostly Basque and playing in the United States professionally, in these places like Connecticut and Florida and so forth. I believe Colorado also had jai alai. If you're from Colorado, let me know if you remember that. So the players were striking because of working conditions, and the strike lasted for years. The owners of the teams and the jai alai venues basically hired what are called in U.S. slang scabs, substitute players, and offered them the same kind of deal as the professional Basque players had been given. In the meantime, lots of different new gambling opportunities were put out there with the opening of more casinos in the United States, and also the creation of the big lotteries that go beyond the state limits that many states participate in. Those big, massive payout lotteries and the rise of casinos in various new locations started to fill in the gap in the places where jai alai was played on a professional level and was a big sports betting activity. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, the word jai alai is an invented word. It's Basque, but it was created by a mining engineer and writer from what is called in Basque Donostia, which is in Spanish the city of San Sebastian, and that is on the Bay of Biscay, which is the part of the Atlantic Ocean that forms the coastline of the Basque country. So the story with jai alai is that jai alai in the Basque country is called cesta punta, which comes from Latin words through Spanish for basket and tip, or in English, point. Baroja wanted to give it a proper Basque name, and so he nicknamed the sport jai alai, which is also can be pronounced gai alai. I'm not sure which dialects of Basque pronounce it one way or the other, but I noticed that there are a couple of different pronunciations online for it. But jai alai seems to be more common, and jai alai means something like happy holiday, and that is the nickname that Baroja gave to Cesta Punta to give it a nice Basque nickname. And that happened in the 19th century. And that's where the people who started it in the United States were part of that tradition of naming. And so it got called jai alai in the United States and not Cesta Punta. Now, jai alai and all of these pelota games ultimately all come from a a version of a ball games against walls, or on courts with walls, where you hit the ball with your hand. And there's still a version that's played of pelota with a taped up hand, as opposed to the chistera, the basket. So you can use there's a hand version of the game. And those are the original versions of all of these games. And in fact, and this is where tennis comes in, because the original versions of tennis also grew out of games that were played with hands instead of rackets. And there are also versions of pelota. This is why I say there's lots of versions of pelota coming from the Basque Country, Spain, France, that have rackets in them, 3 or 4 different types of rackets based on length or width. And it may be that the original hand version of the game was prevalent in many places, not just in the western part of what is now called Europe, but over the entire earth, where people have spherical objects and walls and some time on their hands. And it's interesting because one of those racket sports that eventually developed in England was literally because people had a court and time on their hands in the debtors' prisons of London, where a game that would be known as squash was first played in its early forms. And so the whole concept of court games and ball games is a very old one indeed, going back to ancient times over many continents. There's really no finding an original court game or ball game, because they give human beings a wall and a ball. As I said, there's going to be a game played. Now, the French version, jeu de paume, I hope I said that right, paume. I don't want to say pomme, which is apple. It's paume, Paume, which is the palm of your hand in English. The jeu de paume was the forerunner to what became known as real tennis in the 19th century. It's also called royal tennis in places like Australia. And in the United States, we call it court tennis. And what it is an indoor form of tennis that long preceded lawn tennis, which is what you think of, I think, when I say tennis. Unless you're a real tennis, well, that's not a judgment. That's just a player of real tennis. Unless you're a real tennis player, a player of real tennis, you can be a real tennis player and play lawn tennis. But if you play court tennis, then maybe you think of court tennis first when I say tennis. But that's actually the original, and is called the Sport of Kings. It's not certain that the name real seems to be a 19th century invention to distinguish it from lawn tennis, as to kind of make it the originary tennis, the original. And lawn tennis is like a version of it. However, the real tennis, what would become known as court tennis in the United States, used to also be played outdoors. In fact, there are some accounts that it was some kings of France, among whom the game was very popular, where it moved to indoor courts. And it's really wild. I'm going to put a clip of a court tennis jeu de paume match in the description. It's wild because the ball is served off of these things that are called penthouses, and that's where the spectators are in the spectator version of this. And there's these things that jut out that you could hit the ball off of, that are called tambours, or the tambour. It's a French word for a drum. And there's just it's wild. The ball could be coming from behind you and you hit it forward over a kind of low slung net, it's a very interesting game. But lawn tennis developed out of that form of jeu de paume, which was originally played with the hands, and then rackets got added, and then, the rest, as they say, is history. Okay, well, let's ask the cards for some tips about our work in life. So here we go. Yellow lemons, blue dumplings, magenta noodles. Cards, tell us some things. Here we go. It's card 24. Treat today as tomorrow. As soon as you realize you could do something to contribute to your flourishing, do it right away. If you absolutely must, schedule a working meeting with yourself this week where you do what you need to do. So say something that you're putting off right now that you really need to do right away. Make an appointment with yourself this week, today if you can, but definitely this week, and then put it on your calendar. And when it comes up in your calendar, get that done. And I'll see you tomorrow on Life's Potluck Buffet.